It all started on a cold Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where you can see your own breath linger in the air like a ghost. My kids were bundled in their jackets, backpacks sliding off their little shoulders, and our puppy Scout tugged gently at the leash, eager to explore. The school bus would come any minute. Normally, this was the calmest part of the day, standing by the corner, waiting, listening to the low hum of the neighborhood waking up. But that day, everything changed. Because she was there. Karen. She wasn't supposed to be. Nobody else ever lingered near the bus stop. It was just us, a couple of other parents, sometimes a wave from a jogger passing by. But Karen stood tall in her pressed blazer, arms folded, lips pursed so tight they looked like they might disappear. Behind her, her shiny SUV sat diagonally across the curb, blocking the exact spot where the bus would pull in. At first, I thought maybe she was just waiting on someone, maybe she had car trouble, but then she looked directly at my kids. That stare, sharp, cold, like she was measuring them like they had done something wrong simply by existing. Scout whimpered, tail tucking under, and even my youngest, who usually laughed at everything, grew quiet. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep it polite, my voice steady. "The bus stops here. Could you move your car just a little?" Her response was a slow shake of the head, then words that sent a chill colder than the morning air. "These kids won't be standing here anymore, not while I live in this neighborhood." For a second, I didn't even understand. My mind froze, the way it does when someone crosses a line so boldly you can't believe it's real. I looked around, half expecting one of the other parents to jump in to tell me I misheard. But it was just me, my kids, my puppy, and her. The bus was coming. I could hear the distant groan of its engine. My oldest shifted nervously, asking in a small voice, "Dad, what's happening?" I didn't know what to tell him. Karen stepped forward, heels clicking on the pavement. "This corner is private property now," she snapped. "HOA rules, you can't loiter here, and that dog against regulations." She pointed at Scout like he was some kind of criminal. My heart pounded in my chest. We'd lived here for years. The corner wasn't private, the dog wasn't against any rule, but in that moment I realized the truth. Karen wasn't interested in rules, she was interested in control. The bus slowed, brakes squealing, but it couldn't pull in. Karen's SUV was angled just enough to block the path. The driver leaned out, waving us forward. My kids had to squeeze awkwardly between her car and the curb, Scout tugging nervously at his leash just to climb aboard. Their faces, embarrassed, confused, are burned into my memory. Karen stood there smiling. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself not to react, not to shout, not to make a scene in front of the kids. But inside, something twisted. It wasn't just anger. It was a sense of violation, like the ground under our feet had been taken from us. The bus pulled away and the street grew quiet again. Karen didn't move. She just kept staring at me, waiting for me to say something. When I didn't, she turned, climbed into her SUV, and slowly, deliberately drove away. That was the first time. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the morning again and again. The way she spoke to my kids, the look in her eyes. My wife asked me what was wrong and I told her everything. She put her hand on mine and said softly, "She's testing you, don't let her win." But it's hard not to feel like you're losing when your children are scared to go to their own bus stop. The next morning, they asked if we could walk them all the way to school instead. My heart broke a little at that. No child should feel unsafe in their own neighborhood. I told them, "We'll be fine, I promise I'll be there with you." But inside, I wasn't so sure, because something told me Karen wasn't done. And I was right. The following week, she escalated. The second time she showed up, it was worse, much worse. It was early, too early for most of the neighborhood to be awake. The sky still carried that heavy gray before sunrise, and the streetlights flickered faintly. I could hear the faint creak of the metal gate near our backyard when I let Scout out for a quick run, the sound echoing in the cool, still air. Dust clung to my boots from yesterday's yard work as I stepped back inside to wake the kids. Everything felt normal until we reached the corner again. And there she was. Not just Karen this time, but a folding lawn chair planted right in the middle of the bus stop corner, her legs crossed like she was the self-appointed guardian of that patch of concrete. She had a clipboard in hand, a steaming mug of coffee resting beside her, and the same smug grin on her face. Her SUV, once again, sat angled so the bus would have to maneuver awkwardly just to stop. I tried to breathe steady, maybe she'd move, maybe she'd come to her senses. But the moment she saw us, she leaned forward, voice cutting sharp through the morning air. "Didn't I make myself clear?" she snapped. "This isn't a public corner, you people can't just do whatever you want here." The words "you people" stuck like thorns. My daughter gripped my arm tighter, Scout whined low, his ears folding back. I kept my voice calm. "Karen, this is the designated school bus stop. We're not loitering, we're waiting with the kids like every parent does." She smirked, not anymore. I filed a complaint with the HOA board, effective immediately. This spot is off limits. If you want your kids picked up, you'll have to take them down 2 streets over. 2 streets over meant a blind curve with no sidewalks, a dangerous place for kids to wait. She knew it, that was the point. The bus's engine rumbled closer. My son shuffled his feet, whispering, "Dada, what if she doesn't move?" My stomach turned, but I kept my tone steady. "We'll be fine, just stay with me." The bus rounded the corner, brakes squealing, but once again it couldn't pull all the way in. Karen stayed seated, tapping her pen against the clipboard, eyes locked on me like it was a battle of wills. The driver leaned out, clearly frustrated. "Sir, can you move your car?" "It's not my car," I answered, loud enough for Karen to hear. She sipped her coffee slowly, deliberately. "I'm documenting everything," she said. "And don't even think of letting that dog on the bus stop property again. I'll have animal control here in minutes." The kids squeezed past, embarrassed, clutching their backpacks like shields. Scout barked once, startled by the driver's honk, and Karen wrote something down, shaking her head like she was the victim. When the bus pulled away, I turned to her, my voice tight with the anger I'd been swallowing. "Why are you doing this?" Her answer was so casual it chilled me. "Because rules matter and some people need to learn their place." Those words stayed with me all day. Some people need to learn their place. That evening, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table, the smell of her lasagna barely filling the silence between us. She listened as I told her everything. She leaned back, eyes narrowing. "She can't just invent rules. The HOA doesn't own the bus stop. That's county land." I nodded, but my stomach was knotted. "Doesn't matter. She thinks she can enforce them. And the kids," my voice cracked a little, "they're scared, honey. Our son asked if we could drive him to school instead." She reached across, taking my hand. "Then tomorrow we stand with them, both of us." And so we did. The next morning, the sun barely touched the rooftops as we walked together, me, my wife, our kids, and Scout. My wife carried a thermos, chin high, eyes fixed on the corner. And sure enough, Karen was there, same chair, same SUV, same look of defiance. But something changed. This time, a few other parents showed up too, a mother with her little girl, a dad still in his work boots clutching a lunch pail. They hovered nearby, hesitant, whispering to each other, and I realized Karen had been trying the same thing with them. She wasn't just targeting us. She was testing everyone, seeing who would break first. When the bus arrived, she tried the same stunt. Clipboard raised, voice sharp, declaring trespassing, violations, animal ordinances. But the driver had had enough. He leaned out the window, eyes narrowing. "Lady," he said, "you either move your car or I'm calling the sheriff. I'm not blocking traffic for your games again." The look on Karen's face flickered. For just a second, the mask cracked, but then she forced that smile back, muttering something under her breath before slowly dragging her chair aside. The bus loaded the kids safely this time. The other parents exchanged glances, nodding at me like they'd been waiting for someone to stand up to her. And as the bus pulled away, Karen's eyes locked on mine, cold, promising. She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I thought maybe the worst was behind us. After that morning with the bus driver threatening to call the sheriff, I figured Karen would finally back down, that maybe she'd realized her little game had gone too far. But I was wrong, dead wrong. Because that weekend, a letter showed up in my mailbox. Not from the county, not from the school, from the HOA. The envelope was crisp, the logo of the association stamped neatly in the corner. I stood in the driveway, Scout sniffing at the grass beside me while I tore it open. Inside was a single-page notice, written in stiff official language. It claimed that we were in violation of multiple HOA regulations: improper use of community property, failure to supervise a domestic pet in a shared space, and the one that made my jaw tighten the most, creating a public disturbance. My wife read over my shoulder, her face turning red. "This is Karen, she's behind this. Nobody else on that board cares about the bus stop." She was right, it had her fingerprints all over it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter, tapping it against the wood, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge. The kids were asleep upstairs, Scout curled at my feet. I kept picturing Karen with her clipboard, scribbling, scheming, smiling that smug smile as she filed her so-called complaint. And then came the knock on the doors. It was nearly 9 p.m., and the sound made Scout jump up, barking. I opened it to find 2 HOA representatives, clipboard in hand, just like Karen, though they looked more uncomfortable than aggressive. One of them cleared his throat. "We've had several reports of disturbances at the bus stop. Is there something going on we should know about?" I couldn't help but laugh, a sharp, bitter sound. Disturbances? You mean Karen parking her SUV sideways and harassing kids? The men exchanged a glance, shuffling awkwardly. Well, she did file a formal complaint. Of course she did. I invited them in, laid the letter on the counter, and told them everything. Every detail, the SUV blocking the bus, the chair, the clipboard, the threats, the way my kids were too scared to walk to the corner anymore. By the time I was done, one of the board members rubbed his forehead, sighing. Look, we don't control the bus stop, that's public land, but Karen, she's very persistent, always has been. Persistent, that was one word for it, obsessive was closer. They left with promises to review the matter, but I knew better. Karen had influence. She always showed up at meetings, always talked the loudest, and now she had dragged my family into her little crusade. The following Monday proved it. When we reached the corner, Karen wasn't alone. This time she had backup. Another woman from the HOA stood with her, arms folded, clearly there to make it official. Karen wasted no time. You've been warned, she said, loud enough for the other parents to hear. This bus stop is not for loitering, your dog is not permitted here, and if you continue, we will escalate this with law enforcement. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I steadied my voice. You can escalate all you want, this is public space, you don't own the street. She leaned in, eyes glittering, we'll see about that. The bus pulled up, the driver shaking his head, muttering about calling the sheriff again. My kids climbed aboard quickly, avoiding her gaze. The other parents kept their distance, whispering nervously, clearly afraid of being her next target. And as the bus rolled away, Karen turned back to me. This isn't over, you're going to regret defying me. That night my wife sat with me on the porch, the wooden boards creaking under our chairs, the cool night air wrapping around us. Scout lay at our feet, ears twitching at the distant sound of crickets. She whispered, we can't let her bully us, the kids deserve better. I nodded slowly, staring out into the dark street. Then maybe it's time we stop waiting for the HOA to do the right thing. Maybe it's time we call the real authorities ourselves. Because if Karen wanted to drag us into a fight, she was about to learn she picked the wrong family. The morning the police showed up, the air felt heavier than usual. You know that strange stillness before a storm? That was the mood hanging over the neighborhood. Even Scout seemed restless, pawing at the leash as we walked toward the corner. My kids were quiet, their sneakers scuffing against the pavement, heads down. They knew something was coming, I could feel it too. And sure enough, Karen was there waiting. Her SUV wasn't just angled this time, it was parked fully across the curb, hazard lights blinking, blocking the spot entirely. She stood tall in front of it, clipboard clutched like a weapon, lips pressed into a thin, victorious line. But what stopped me cold was Karen. It was the patrol car idling right behind her. Red and blue lights flashed softly against the morning fog. A county sheriff's deputy leaned against the hood, arms folded, eyes on us as we approached. My stomach dropped. Karen had actually done it. She'd called the police. The deputy straightened as we neared. Sir, ma'am, can I have a word? The kids froze behind me, clutching their backpacks tighter. My wife whispered, it's okay, just stay calm. But my pulse was hammering. Karen spoke first, her voice loud and triumphant. Officer, this is the family I told you about. They've been trespassing on HOA property, harassing residents, letting their dog run wild. It's out of control. I couldn't help it, I laughed. A short, bitter laugh that made the deputy raise an eyebrow. Trespassing? This is a county bus stop. We've been here for years. She's the one blocking the bus with her SUV. The deputy glanced between us, clearly trying to size up who was telling the truth. My son tugged my sleeve, whispering, Dad, are we in trouble? My chest ached hearing that. No child should feel like a criminal just for waiting for a school bus. I crouched down, met his eyes. No, buddy, we didn't do anything wrong, just breathe, okay? The deputy finally stepped closer. Let's clear a few things up. First off, this corner, county property, not HOA, not private. Anyone has the right to stand here. For the first time, Karen's face twitched, but the HOA. Ma'am, the deputy cut her off, his voice firm. HOA doesn't control public bus stops. I felt a surge of relief, but it didn't last long. Karen's voice sharpened, desperate now. What about the dog? That animal is a liability. It lunged at me last week, nearly knocked me over. Scout barked once, startled by her shouting, then pressed close against my leg. My wife stepped in, her voice steady but cold. That's a lie. He's never hurt anyone. Our kids play with him every day. You're inventing stories. The deputy crouched, giving Scout a quick look. The puppy wagged his tail, licking his hand. The deputy straightened, unimpressed. Doesn't look dangerous to me. The school bus arrived just then, air brakes hissing. The driver leaned out, eyes narrowing at the scene. Officer, are you finally handling this? She's been blocking me every morning for 2 weeks. That was it, the deputy's patience snapped. He turned to Karen, voice low but commanding. Ma'am, move your vehicle now or I'll have it towed. For a moment, the entire street froze. Karen's jaw tightened, her eyes darting between me, the bus, the deputy. She looked cornered, like a chess player who suddenly realized every move left her in check. Then she exploded. You can't tell me what to do, I pay dues here, I know my rights, she screamed, stepping toward the deputy. Her face was red, eyes wild. These people don't belong in this neighborhood, they're ruining everything. Gasps rippled through the small group of parents who had gathered. My wife pulled the kids closer, shielding them. I stood frozen, watching her unravel. The deputy's hand went to his belt. Ma'am, step back, calm down. But she didn't. She shoved her clipboard against his chest, shouting, arrest them, arrest the whole family. That was the breaking point. The deputy grabbed her wrist, spinning her around with practiced force. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the morning. The parents murmured in shock. My kids stared wide-eyed, clinging to my wife. Scout barked again, confused but alert. Karen shrieked, thrashing against the cuffs. This isn't over, you'll regret this, you'll all regret this. The deputy radioed for backup, his voice calm over her shouting. Within minutes, another patrol car rolled up, lights flashing brighter against the houses. I'll never forget the sight. Karen being guided into the back of that cruiser, her clipboard lying abandoned on the pavement, her SUV still blocking the bus stop like some monument to her stubbornness. The deputy turned to us, his voice gentler now. I'm sorry your family had to go through this. I'll file a report. She won't be back for a while. The bus driver gave me a nod of solidarity as the kids finally climbed aboard, their faces still pale but a little lighter. The other parents lingered, whispering about what they'd just witnessed. Some looked relieved, others worried. And me, I stood there, Scout pressed against my leg, watching the cruiser disappear down the street. Relief washed over me, but only partly. Because deep down I knew Karen's. And I knew people like her don't stop. Handcuffs don't end obsessions. They just make them worse. The morning after Karen was taken away, the neighborhood felt lighter, almost unnaturally so. For the first time in weeks, the bus stop was clear. No SUV angled across the curb, no folding chair planted like a throne, just the usual hum of parents talking in low voices, kids laughing nervously, and the squeak of sneakers on the sidewalk. I remember standing there, watching my kids climb onto the bus without flinching, without looking over their shoulders. Scout wagged his tail like he could sense the tension had finally broken. My wife gave me a faint smile, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was over. But with Karen, nothing was ever over. That evening when I opened the mailbox, my stomach twisted. Another letter, HOA letterhead again. I tore it open right there on the driveway, the sun dipping low behind the rooftops. My wife leaned over my shoulder, reading as I did, and I swear my hands started shaking. It wasn't just a violation notice this time. It was a formal warning of pending legal action. They claimed we were creating a hostile environment within the community, that our defiance of HOA directives was grounds for fines, even removal of privileges, and in bold letters near the bottom, we strongly advise you to seek legal counsel. My wife exhaled sharply, she's pulling strings from behind bars. And she was right. Karen had influence and she wasn't about to let an arrest stop her. If anything, it seemed to fuel her like she was doubling down, determined to make us pay for embarrassing her. That night I couldn't sit still. I paced the living room, the floorboards creaking under every step. The kids were upstairs, the faint sound of their laughter drifting down as they played. Scout curled up on the rug, his eyes tracking me nervously. My wife sat on the couch, watching me wear a path across the room. What if we just ignored it? She asked softly. She wants a fight, maybe if we don't give her one she'll burn out. I stopped, shaking my head. You saw what she's capable of. Ignoring her won't stop her, she'll keep coming, and next time she won't just go after us, she'll drag the kids deeper into this. The phone rang later that night, a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Walker, a man's voice said, low and measured. This is Robert Hensley. I'm legal counsel for the HOA. We need to discuss the violations your family has accumulated. My throat went dry. Violations, you mean the ones Karen fabricated? There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet chuckle. Fabricated or not, they're on record, and unless you want to see this escalate into court, I'd suggest compliance. Compliance, the word dripped with threat. I clenched the phone tighter. Listen carefully. My family has done nothing wrong. The sheriff himself told her to back off. If you want to pursue this, I'll be happy to share his report with a judge. The line went silent, then a sigh. You'll regret this stubbornness, Mr. Walker, and just like that, the call ended. My wife was staring at me when I set the phone down. What did he say? I forced a thin smile. That we're stubborn and he's right because I'm not backing down. The following days grew tense again. We'd walk to the bus stop, half expecting to see her SUV waiting, half expecting another deputy parked on the corner, but she wasn't there. Not physically, at least. Instead, her presence crept in through whispers, neighbors crossing the street when they saw us, parents avoiding eye contact at the bus stop. One even muttered, maybe you should just move the kids down the road. Why make it harder for everyone? That cut deep. It wasn't just Karen anymore. She was turning people against us. One evening after dinner, I stood out on the porch, the wooden boards cool under my bare feet. The neighborhood was quiet, but I could feel it, the tension, the invisible wall growing between us and the rest of the community. My wife joined me, wrapping her arms around herself against the breeze. She's isolating us, she whispered. I nodded. That's her playbook. If she can't scare us directly, she'll make sure we're alone when the next blow comes. And I knew a next blow was coming. Because that's how people like Karen worked. They didn't just want to win. They wanted to break you. The first fine showed up on a Thursday. I remember the envelope because it was thick, heavier than the usual HOA junk mail. The kids were upstairs doing homework. Scout curled at my feet when I slid it open at the kitchen table. My wife leaned in, already bracing herself. And there it was. Violation, unauthorized use of community property. Fine, $250. My wife's voice broke the silence. $250 for standing at a bus stop. It didn't stop there. Attached were photos, grainy, printed straight from a cheap camera, me holding Scout's leash, my kids clutching their backpacks, my wife standing beside them. The captions underneath read like a police report, subject loitering with animal, children obstructing common area. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Karen's shadow was all over them. Even from behind bars, she was orchestrating this. She had someone watching us, snapping pictures, building a case. 2 days later, another letter, another fine, this time $500, then $750, each one stacked on the last, threatening legal collection efforts, warning of possible liens against property. I sat at the table one night, the stack of letters spread like a deck of cards, my wife packing in the background. This isn't just harassment anymore, I muttered. This is war. She stopped, turned to me, her eyes fierce. Then we fight back. The next morning, we showed up at the bus stop like always. But this time, we weren't alone. 2 men from the HOA board were already there, clipboards in hand, standing stiff as statues. One of them raised a camera the second he saw Scout. Click. The sound cut through the morning air like a gunshot. My daughter flinched. My son whispered, Dad, they're taking pictures of us. I nodded, jaw clenched. Stay close, don't worry. The bus driver pulled in, clearly fed up, and barked out the window. You people gonna do this every day? These are kids, not criminals. The board members ignored him, scribbling notes as my kids climbed aboard. Parents hung back, watching, whispering. Some shook their heads. Others just turned away, unwilling to get involved. But then one voice cut through. A father I'd seen before, still in his construction boots, lunch pail dangling at his side. He stepped forward, glaring at the board members. Enough, these are children. Stop treating them like they're breaking laws. The men stiffened but didn't respond. Just clicked their pens, took another picture, and walked off. I caught his eye, nodding in silent thanks. He gave me a quick pat on the shoulder before heading back down the street, and in that moment I realized something important. Not everyone had been turned against us. Some were just waiting for someone else to speak first. That evening, the situation escalated again. We were sitting down to dinner when headlights swept across the living room wall. I glanced out the window and froze. An SUV had pulled right up to our curb, not Karen's, someone else. A man stepped out, dressed in a crisp suit, holding a folder. When I opened the door, he introduced himself. Mr. Walker, I'm here on behalf of the HOA. You've accumulated over $2,000 in fines. If unpaid, a lien will be placed on your home. My wife's hand gripped the back of the doorframe, a lien overweighting at a bus stop. The man's expression didn't change. Failure to comply with HOA directives has consequences. Consider this your final warning. He handed me the folder and walked away without another word. I stood there in the doorway, folder heavy in my hands, heart pounding. Inside were itemized charges, threats of legal action, and at the bottom, a deadline in bold: payment due within 14 days. That night, as the house grew quiet and the kids slept upstairs, I sat in the living room staring at the folder. The weight of it pressed down harder than I wanted to admit. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about power, about the HOA flexing every ounce of authority it thought it had. My wife sat beside me, silent for a long time before she finally whispered, "Are we going to lose everything because of her?" I swallowed hard, not if I have anything to say about it. Because here's the truth, bullies always think they've won when they push hardest. They think fear will make you fold, but sometimes pressure doesn't break people. Sometimes it hardens them. And as I sat there, the folder in my lap, Scout curled against my legs, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just going to defend my kids anymore. I was going to end this. The knock came just after sunrise. 3 slow, deliberate thuds on the front door. For a second, I thought it was another HOA delivery, another fine, another threat. But when I opened it, 2 uniformed deputies stood on the porch, one older, silver hair beneath his cap, the other younger, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Walker," the older one asked. I nodded, bracing myself. He gave a small smile. "Relax, we're not here for you." Those words, "not here for you," dropped the weight off my shoulders like a stone. For the first time in weeks, I let out a breath without realizing I'd been holding it. He stepped inside, scanning the folder I'd shown him the night before when I finally went down to the sheriff's office. These fines, these threats, this lien nonsense, none of it holds water, they're bluffing. HOA rules don't override county or state law, especially when it comes to a public school bus stop. The younger deputy added, "And we've got complaints about intimidation. Photos of minors without parental consent, that crosses a line." My wife leaned against the wall, relief washing over her face. "So they can't take our house." The older deputy shook his head firmly. "Not for this. They can send letters all day long, but until a court signs off, and no judge in this county is going to, it's nothing but paper." For the first time in months, I felt my spine straighten. Hope wasn't a flicker anymore, it was a flame. But the deputy wasn't done. He tucked the folder under his arm and lowered his voice. "Now here's the thing, Karen may be sitting in county lockup, but she's still pulling strings. She's got allies on that board who think they're untouchable. We're looking into harassment charges. I need you to keep documenting everything. Every letter, every camera click, every confrontation." I nodded, determination locking in place. "I will." That night I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud. I kept hearing those words, "they're bluffing." And for the first time, I saw the cracks in Karen's empire. She wasn't invincible, she was desperate. The next morning at the bus stop, something shifted. Parents who had been silent before began inching closer. A mother with a toddler on her hip whispered, "We heard what they tried to do, it's wrong." Another father, the one in construction boots, nodded toward me. "We're with you, enough is enough." And then, almost as if on cue, the board members showed up again. Same clipboards, same cameras, only this time, instead of shrinking back, I raised my phone and started filming them. "Hey," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "you enjoy taking pictures of kids because now the camera's on you." The man with the clipboard froze. His partner muttered, "We're authorized by the HOA." But before he could finish, the bus driver leaned out the window again. "No, you're not. This is harassment. Everyone sees it." Parents murmured in agreement, a ripple of voices spreading through the group. The board members, suddenly outnumbered, lowered their cameras and walked off without another word. It was a small victory, but it was the first time they backed down. 2 days later, the victory turned into something bigger. The county called a meeting, not just for me but for every resident under Karen's HOA, a hearing about misconduct, misuse of funds, and abuse of authority. The room was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, people fanning themselves with papers, tension thick in the air, and at the front sat the HOA board, stiff, silent, trying to look powerful. Karen's seat was empty, though her shadow hung heavy over everyone. When my name was called, I stood, palms sweating, throat dry, but then I looked around the room. Dozens of neighbors, parents, people who had whispered in hallways, avoided eye contact at the bus stop, shrugged off Karen's rules because they were scared. They were all watching. So I spoke. I told them about the fines, about the cameras, about the threats of liens, the folders shoved into my hands at dinner. I described my kids' fear, my wife's tears, the sleepless nights, the bus driver forced to referee grown adults. And I held up the stack of letters. This is what intimidation looks like. This is what happens when power goes unchecked, and if it can happen to my family, it can happen to any of you. The room was silent, not the silence of indifference, the silence of people finally realizing they'd been living under the same storm cloud, waiting for someone else to call it out. The county official cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Walker." Then one by one, other residents began to speak. A woman admitted she'd been fined for planting flowers the HOA didn't approve of. A man confessed he'd paid hundreds in mystery fees he never understood. Another family revealed they'd been threatened with foreclosure over a paint color. It all poured out, years of fear and frustration spilling into the open. By the time the meeting ended, the board sat slumped, cornered, and for the first time I realized Karen's grip wasn't as tight as she thought. Because fear works until people stop being afraid. And that night, as I tucked my kids into bed, Scout curled up on the rug, my wife smiling for the first time in months, I whispered to myself, "It's not over, but we're winning." The news broke on a Monday morning. I was pouring cereal for the kids when my phone buzzed. A neighbor's text lit up the screen, "Turn on Channel 9." The headline scrolled across the bottom in bold red letters, "Local HOA president arrested on multiple charges." There she was, Karen, being escorted out of the county jail in handcuffs, hair a tangled mess, eyes darting as reporters shouted questions. Fraud, harassment, misuse of funds. Words I'd only whispered in frustration were now plastered on the screen for everyone to see. My wife gasped, hand over her mouth. The kids leaned closer, wide-eyed, and Scout, almost sensing the shift in the air, let out a low bark. It was over. But victory didn't come in a single moment. It unraveled slowly, like a knot finally loosening. That week, the county froze the HOA's accounts. Board members resigned one by one, scrambling to distance themselves from Karen. Neighbors who had once avoided us now crossed the street to shake my hand, to say thank you, to apologize for staying silent so long. The bus stop changed, too. No more cameras, no more clipboards, just kids, backpacks bouncing, parents sipping coffee from travel mugs, conversations flowing like normal life. The sound of the bus's brakes became ordinary again, not a signal of tension, but of routine. One morning, as the bus pulled away, the construction boot dad clapped me on the back. "You didn't just stand up for your family, you stood up for all of us." I smiled, but inside I knew the truth. I hadn't done it alone. It was the sheriff who took my complaint seriously, the parents who finally spoke up, the county that listened when enough voices filled the room. One person may have lit the match, but it was the fire in everyone else that burned Karen's reign to the ground. Still, the scars remained. There were nights I'd wake up sweating, still hearing the click of that camera at the bus stop. My wife would squeeze my hand in the dark, whispering, "It's over, she's gone." But trauma doesn't vanish overnight. It lingers, reshaping the way you see the world. And yet mixed in with the scars was something else, strength. Because here's the thing no one tells you, when someone pushes you to the edge, you don't always fall. Sometimes you find your footing, sometimes you build wings. Months later, at a neighborhood gathering organized by the county, I found myself standing in front of dozens of families. The new interim board was being elected, one chosen by residents, not dictated by fear. My name was nominated. I declined. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd learned something vital through it all. Leadership isn't about holding a title. It's about refusing to look away when something is wrong, about protecting your family, your dignity, even when it costs you sleepless nights. As the sun dipped low that evening, kids played tag on the grass, Scout chasing after them, his tail wagging. My wife sat beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, peace settled over the neighborhood. Karen's house sat empty now, a for sale sign planted in the yard. The same gate she once guarded like a fortress squeaked in the wind, lonely and forgotten. And I thought back to that very first morning when all this began, the chill in the air, my kids waiting at the bus stop, Karen's shadow stretching across the pavement. She had tried to control everything, tried to make fear the rule of law. But in the end, fear was the very thing that destroyed her. Because dignity, once awakened, is louder than intimidation. Because truth, once spoken, is heavier than lies. And because sometimes karma doesn't wait for years. Sometimes it rides right up to your curb in a sheriff's patrol car, flashing lights cutting through the dark. That night, as the crickets sang and the porch light flickered, I leaned back in my chair, scowled at my feet, and let the quiet settle. It was over. And somehow I knew this. The strongest fences aren't the ones built by HOAs. They're the ones built by families standing together, refusing to be broken. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.